What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Questions You Never Thought to Ask, the Whitewater Kayak Podcast. My name is Seth Ashworth, and this week I am speaking with former freestyle kayak world champion James Pringle Bebbington on the impact that eating vegetables had on him winning freestyle kayak world championships in 2011. Before we get started on what I think you're going to enjoy as a pretty fun and informative podcast, I just want to say a big thank you and shout out to the people who support this podcast via my Patreon channel. Patreon is a crowdfunding platform where you're able to chip in a couple of dollars every month to kind of help keep this running, and you get early access to the podcast. So whenever I record them, I usually get them on the Patreon channel basically that same day, but they might not come out publicly online for a few weeks after that in some cases. So a good little opportunity to help keep this podcast going and also get to hear it before anyone else. So that's like a little bonus for you. But I really appreciate the support of those people, and I would not be able to do this podcast without them. So big shout out to those people. And yeah, that's all I've got for this week. Enjoy. I think you're going to like this podcast. I enjoyed filming it both times. So go check out patreon.com/Seth Ashworth to support this one and get early access. Yeah, thanks. This week I'm joined by James Pringle Bebbington, world champion freestyle kayaker and enthusiastic vegetable eater. We're about to start this podcast, and I just want to preface it by saying that we've been talking for 25 minutes and I forgot to press record. So if at any point Pringle and I are pushing through a conversation, it's because we've literally just had this conversation and I am too stupid to have pressed record correctly the first time. So I'm sorry, but Pringle and I are gonna recover some ground. So Pringle, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, Seth.
Welcome back to the podcast, I feel like I should say. Pringle, do you want to run us through a bit of an overview? I mentioned you're a world champion freestyle kayaker, and I mentioned you're an enthusiastic vegetable eater. Do you want to run us through a bit of an overview of your kayaking career from Ute to now?
Sure. So I started kayaking about 24 years ago. So I started when I was 8 years old. And I pretty much did freestyle kayaking as my main focus from the start. I did some rivers and stuff, but my main focus has always been freestyle. That's kind of where my heart's lied, and did pretty well as a junior. So I was on I think I first made the Great Britain team for freestyle in 2004. And then I was basically going to World Championships and European Championships in alternate years ever since, but with a few years gap in the middle. And I've kind of forgot what I'm saying.
You were just telling us about how you were a youth from, where are you from, Lancaster?
Oh, yeah, Lancashire? Yeah, and then so I switched to what I might have heard a bit about is I, for the most part, eat a raw vegan diet that I've been doing now since 2010. And I've started to do that with the primary goal of helping my performance in freestyle as the run up to the World Championships. And as Seth mentioned, I was very fortunate that I was able to win World Championships in 2011 in Plattling, Germany, and the World Cup the year before. And the World Championships was, I think, was a large part of that was the switch to looking after my own health in the couple of years leading up to it, and then culminating switching to a raw diet and sort of trying to just be the healthiest and fittest I could be, really. It's a very condensed overview of my paddling.
I feel so terrible that we spoke about this in more depth and I forgot to press record. I feel like such an idiot right now. But I feel like the key points I wanted to run back over were when you went from being called James Bebbington to when you went to being called James Pringle Bebbington, and the origin story of your nickname, which is the name I knew you as only for a long time. Can you run us through how that happened? Like, how old were you when you became Pringle? How did that come about? Who are you running with? Where were you paddling at that time?
Sure. So back then, I was about 14 when I got named Pringle, and it happened because I had like a real little group of friends that we used to paddle all the time. It was kind of like a northern bunch of paddlers. So we had Rob Sellers, Ed Smith from Scotland, and a Norfolk kayaker called Matt Smith, and then Rosie Cripps from Scotland. And we were sort of paddling together regularly. And that summer, we'd all sort of decided that we were going to spend the entire 6 weeks of our summer holidays at the White Water Course in Nottingham and just paddle every day. We were all staying in Ed's parents' caravan. And I was also, I think, the worst ability-wise of our little groups. Of course, I took a little bit more of the jokes and banter than the others. And I can't remember exactly how I got named it. There's two stories that I'm not sure if it was both of them added together or one of them. I think if you asked Ed, he'd give you the definitive answer. But I think Ed's favourite version as to how I got called it was that they bet me to eat like a fly on top of a Pringle or something, and I did it. I think for like a pound or something, not very much.
Old party Pringle.
Or the other one was I just turned up with like 2 packets of Pringles and not very much money to last me the entire summer. And either way, one way or another, they decided that they were going to call me Pringle. And of course, being named after a packet of crisps wasn't perhaps the most inspiring nickname when you're a 14-year-old. But because I think I disliked it so much initially, it of course stuck like a fly to fly paper. And of course, over the years, I grew to love it. And that's kind of what everyone in paddling's known me as ever since, to the point, I think, that when I'd be away paddling for months and months at a time, when I'd be around my parents, the only people who really called me James at the time, it would take me a little bit of time to respond because I got so used to people calling me Pring or Pringle. And of course, now I've had it on the bottom of my boat since 2010. So yeah, it's definitely become, I've definitely warmed to it.
Yeah, I would say probably for the first at least year that I knew you, maybe 2 years, I didn't know your first name was James. So it's interesting how those nicknames can stick sometimes, and it's good that you've embraced your one. And we talked a little bit about the Rat Pack crew you had as a kid there, and there was a time in your like early 20s, late teens, where it was a bit more like Party Pringle, and you had a different Rat Pack crew of friends who were pretty down to spend some time at the bar. You spent a lot of time in Uganda, which has a strong off-water party scene as well as a strong on-the-water kayaking scene. And I know you got sick a lot while you were there. Can you expound a bit on your time in Uganda, that time as like kind of Party Pringle, and then how you got away from that?
Yeah, so I kind of skipped over a bit, but when I did pretty well as a junior. And then a few things happened is that when I sort of moved up the seniors, I was still doing all right. I was still doing well in the UK, but obviously it gets a lot harder when you're having to compete against EJ and people who've been competing at a super high level for many years. So that got harder. And then obviously that's the age of starting to trying to figure out how you pay for it all yourself rather than having to rely upon your parents for the most part. So there's a bit of that thrown in. And then I think I'd had a bit of a disagreement with the sponsor, and I decided that the best thing to do would be to get out of Europe for a little while. So I got a job making the rafting videos for Narwhal Explorers with a guy called Davey. So I was there. I'd paddle for fun some of the time, and the other times we were making the rafting videos, which meant that every night you'd be in the bar selling the DVD. And there's me and Anton, who was working together at the time, Anton Imler, Swedish kayak, and we were kind of best friends at the time. And we'd be just trying to outdo each other every day. So I think we made all kinds of bets that we had to run each under every day, or we'd have to buy a crate of beer, and it was every night just in the bar, basically. And with that kind of abuse of drinking excessively, not getting much sleep, paddling hard all the time, and not taking any care whatsoever for malaria or bilharzia or any other kind of stuff, I was just getting sick all the time. More so towards the end of it, really, but overall, just it was the worst thing you could probably do for your overall health in a very short space of time. As good an experience as it was, it couldn't go on like that forever, really, unless I wanted to have to live a long life. I think there was bets at the time that I wouldn't make it till 21, so I'm relieved I've outdone that.
And that time while you were in Uganda, while you were working as a video kayaker and kind of surviving the dream, I guess is like fair to say, you met the lady who's now your wife, Katya, who's a Russian kayaker.
Yeah, so we met in 2008. Actually, first of all, I think she was in Uganda in April when I was there, and she caught my attention, but I was too shy to really say hello or anything. And then in the World Cups, she was competing for the first time internationally, and I was chasing her all around trying to impress her and failing miserably all that summer. But I knew she was coming to Uganda that winter to train. So I think as soon as she got to Uganda, I was basically hassling her the entire time until eventually she took pity on me, I think. But she was, at first we was obviously just partying together and doing everything as we had been. But she was a lot more motivated to get back into, or to do better in competition, having only just come into that world. And she was very motivated for kayaking alongside everything else. And so together we kind of shifted away from that sort of drinking culture and started to try to get better at kayaking. So that winter would have been like, I think it'd be 2008, or it'd be 2009 winter. We left Uganda. So she went back to Russia to make visas. I went back to the UK after being in Uganda for 11 months. And I only had a couple $1,000 saved up from the time, because obviously being in the bar every day is not a great way of saving money. So in my mum's old car, we went and competed at all the events around Europe that year. And we'd stopped drinking, but we were just eating normal food at that point. And both of us did pretty well that year in the Euro Cups. And then, can't remember the exact chronology of it, but I ended up winning the World Cups in 2010. And I think, a podium, but at most of the events that season. And then we went back to Uganda that winter to train to obviously get out of the cold, because no one wants that. And that's where Katya first sort of tried a raw diet, which means only eating raw fruits and vegetables, a few seeds, nuts, that kind of thing. And that's kind of what led us on to sort of properly taking charge of our health to a degree, and for what I've kind of become known for, I guess, in later years. That's kind of been a large focus of what I do these days, is talking about diet and health, especially what Katya does, because she works as a nutritionist nowadays, trying to treat quite seriously ill people using diet. It's not a case of we just did it originally so we could kayak better and do better in competition, where she's now working with people who just want to live and just want to get rid of whatever challenges they're facing, really. So it did impact her life in a huge way.
And what we kind of spoke about in the botched first version of this podcast I forgot to record, was that your like movement towards eating only fruits and vegetables and not cooking them and not eating any cooked food, was like, in your opinion, it was like it was like the one thing that the other people who were also on the podium in that 2011 Worlds weren't doing, because it was like you versus Peter Chonka. You both had a lot of time at that Plattling wave. You both had very high scoring rides. You were both training like all the time for that, like a lot of that period that built up to it. But the thing that you were doing that he wasn't was this kind of raw food diet, lifestyle. I don't know what word you prefer to use for it. I like lifestyle. Do you think that's a fair comment? Like, and what were the advantages that you found from eating this way?
Yeah, so Peter was a huge inspiration into a lot of our approaches to kayaking at the time, because he was one of the not that many kayakers then was approaching it in a sort of sports sciencey way, trying to look at all the things that they could do to perform better, doing some kind of strength training, that kind of thing. So I was hugely inspired by his approach, and he was winning most stuff in the previous years. So he was kind of like the Dane Jackson of the time, I suppose, before then. And so he sort of really inspired me, that approach. That winter's when Katya first tried the raw vegan diet, then I tried it. And we was approaching it as a means to, one, avoid sickness, and two, get stable energy levels and perform better. And we just wanted it to try anything we could that would help us give a better chance of doing well in kayaking, really. And benefits wise, I think the main things it did for me was it stabilized my energy level. So before, some sessions I'd go out and I'd have tons of energy and I'd be paddling really well, but then the next session I'd have like nothing in the tank. I just couldn't do, and this is even on like a normal, what by a normal diet would be considered probably quite healthy. I just wasn't getting the energy, like stable energy levels that I could count on every time. And when we switched to a raw diet, for me, the biggest thing was that my energy levels stabilized, not immediately, but within a couple of weeks and after getting used to kind of eating that kind of food. And especially as it got further and further in, I felt better and better, that I could pretty much rely on that whatever I needed to do and have some energy for it. And then it's just a case of the recovery speed, like not getting like lots of people getting all kinds of muscle tears and stuff in paddling just from paddling so hard every day. It's not high impact, but the water's very tough on your body there, especially when you're doing like big long sessions on the water all the time. So a lot of people is getting all kinds of muscle tears and that kind of like minor injury, but that slows you down a bit. And we just weren't feeling that, and we was needing a little bit less sleep than I think we did beforehand. So it was just recovering better, wasn't getting any infections, wasn't getting sick. And I don't attribute everything to diet at the time. There's like a whole load of factors. We were basically trying everything we could to do well and training super hard and making sure we was there all the time and trying to figure out all kinds of new moves and stuff and ways to maximize the scoring. But in my mind, the diet did play a huge part of it, and also the motivational aspect played into it. That there weren't many vegan athletes at the time, and there certainly wasn't. I didn't know of any real raw vegan athletes, and we were getting an awful lot of sort of ridicule and jokes from people making comments about what we're eating, and that obviously it's not what people considered then to be the ideal athlete diet. They thought it was, what on earth are you doing? So there's quite a bit of motivation to kind of show that what we were doing worked, and what better way was there than to try and put it into practice at Worlds. And and that was kind of, it went so well, and we just kept going with it.
Yeah, I think winning is the best revenge for those people who are like, what are you doing? You're stupid.
I mean, people weren't nasty, really. It was just, I can well understand it's very outside, especially for then. It would be very outside of what people would think to do. So I don't really now look at the time it bothered me. Now looking back, I just kind of see it that it was inevitable, really, and that's what you expect to happen in that sort of situation. And trying something new that you would expect that people might not necessarily understand it the same way that you do when you've read into it and experienced it for yourself.
I think even now, like now, obviously it's like really trendy to do, vegan things, and there's lots more people who are like looking into that, like what you eat as a way to improve your performance. But even now, to say to someone like, I'm not eating anything that gets cooked is still, it's a lot of steps, right? It's a lot of layers on top of, from like if you're eating like standard American diet or whatever, or it's a lot of steps away from just like not eating meat or not eating dairy or like not eating fish or not eating, it's like you've removed a lot of things and then you've taken this big thing of cooking, which is like, another level almost. So I think even now it's like there's a lot more stuff going on in the plant-based world, but it's, I don't know. Do you notice like right now there's a lot of people who are interested in like the raw food thing versus just the regular like plant-based whole foods life?
Well, plant-based and vegan has definitely took off in a massive way in recent years, even amongst kayakers. A lot more kayakers now, like, I think yourself included, have got interested in eating a plant-based diet, and Jed, and there's a whole bunch of paddlers that have, and Rush, who've, I think for the most part, dabbled or do eat that way for a large part. So the vegan diet has definitely changed in a huge way in those years. As for a raw food diet, I can't be 100% sure. Maybe it's just the fact that I see more people from that world these days, but I do think there's more awareness of it, definitely, especially in like the plant-based world. And in certain kind of athletic fields, especially endurance sports, there's already quite not a large number, but a reasonable sized amount of athletes are considering or in some way moving towards eating some form of a raw diet. But yes, it is still absolutely a niche, and I think even today, for a lot of people, they'll have never heard of it for sure. Especially if you're coming from a standard American diet, it is a huge jump. Yeah.
And at the start of your, again, I'm going to pick on some more points that we talked about in the failed podcast version of this podcast. At the start of your kind of shift into this, it was logistically quite simple because you and Katya lived in the van. You didn't have a kitchen, you didn't have a blender, you didn't have tools, you didn't have very much. So like logistically, it's very simple to eat a raw foods lifestyle because it's like easy to just buy vegetables and eat them.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, so we had like an ideal, inadvertently, we wasn't planned that way, but we just had the ideal situation for someone who's switching onto it. First of all, because we first tried it in Uganda when we was living in a tent, and there was no kitchen. We didn't have enough money to be going to restaurants all the time. And there was like an absolute abundance of delicious tropical fruits and avocados and tomatoes, all kinds of stuff. And then when we went back into Europe to compete, again, we was living out the back of the van. So we didn't have a kitchen. We weren't staying in hotels. We weren't near any restaurants, cafes, that kind of thing. So it was very easy it wasn't really a struggle to stick to because there wasn't really another option, because we left our like stove behind that time. So there wasn't any temptation there.
You left your stove behind?
Yeah, we didn't bring a
So
stove.
you were like no plan B. You were no plan B on raw foods.
No. Well, like we'd already been doing it, I think, for 2 or 3 months in Uganda, maybe. And then, so we already kind of felt pretty. By that point, we'd gone through like the initial struggle of figuring out what to eat, and I'd already put on the weight that I'd lost in the first couple of months. So, and I was feeling good. So it wasn't too. I didn't feel like it logically made sense to be like, no other animals in nature eat cooked food, and that kind of made logical sense, and I felt it working. So there wasn't really a gamble there. It was more like,
so let's talk about something. Let's talk about something you just said for a second. So again, we talked about this in the failed version of this podcast, but when you started, you lost quite a lot of weight and you looked pretty unhealthy for a period, and then you bounced back and came back to like your healthy weight. Like, you're not a big guy anyway, but you had a period where you did look like very thin and like you maybe needed to eat a little bit more. Do you want to talk us through that and how you got around that?
Yeah, so it happens to like a lot of people when they switch to a raw diet, especially as long as they're eating enough, because obviously there's what you could lose weight by just not eating enough, which I don't think was the case. So as long as you're having enough calories, this is like an additional thing. So if your body's being built on what I would call, well, I didn't eat healthily in the past when I was younger, and then I'd switched to a healthier diet, but still, like lots of cooked food, lots of meat, that kind of thing, which I think is suboptimal for how our bodies evolved to eat. And then when we switched onto this raw diet, which was just full of fresh vegetables and fruits and stuff, which is, I think, as close as I can think of to our optimal diet based on my understanding, I think your body's trying to get rid of your body stores all kinds of toxins, and I've been taking all kinds of alcohol and whatnot over the years. So there must have been all kinds of toxins and things from all the malaria medication and stuff I've been taking, and all the kinds of junk stored in all your fat and muscle tissue. So I think what happens is that you lose, when you first switch to an optimal kind of diet, your body finally gets a bit of a break, and it's like, well, let's get rid of all the crap and we can rebuild this as long as you're physically active every day, which we were, because we were just paddling. So I still felt fine, but I did get very, very skinny. So I looked a bit gaunt in my face, and I was getting quite a bit of comments because obviously what I was doing was pretty unusual. And that was really like over the first month or two that was like that. And then by the third month is when it sort of came back on pretty quickly. So like I say, I've always been pretty slim. So it was just that I went excessively skinny for the first, by the second month I was excessively skinny, then it started to come back. And by the third month, I was sort of back to looking healthy again. I had the colour in my cheeks again. And I was essentially, just because I was working with my body, it's kind of rebuilt itself back to sort of a usual sort of healthy weight again for my sort of body type.
And did you guys like consult with your doctor before you started making this switch, or do you just go all in on it?
No, we just went all in. I mean, like, we switched in Uganda, so we didn't have like any access to doctors. We didn't even really have internet. We didn't even realize it was that radical a thing. Really, we didn't think about it a huge amount, other than it made sense to us when we thought about it, and what we'd read from people's experience who had done it made sense. And then I think I mentioned in the failed bit, but I mentioned, so I read an article by Kelly Slater saying that he tried this, and he's obviously an 11 times world champion surfer. He tried a raw diet at some point and felt a lot of benefits, just struggled to maintain it with his lifestyle. So I just kind of felt confident, and we didn't really, well, given how I'd been abusing my body for the previous, not the year before, but the year before that, so 2 years back, whatever I was doing now couldn't be anything close to a risk compared to how I had been abusing it. So this could only be a good thing. And like, you'd quickly see that if it wasn't working, Like, we didn't know it would for sure work, but we felt good initially. And if we would have started to feel rubbish, we'd have just changed it. I mean, we was not that hung up on it. Wasn't even anything about being vegan for it. It's more just about performance. So if we started to feel rubbish, or we hadn't been performing well, like if we started to suck at kayaking or suck in competition, we'd have just tried something else. We only stuck with it because it worked, at least for us.
Yeah, I think, if it, as a general rule of life, if it's good enough for Kelly Slater, that's a good baseline for a lot of things. And I think it's fair to say that like Party Pringle was pretty next level in the nuts category. So it's you're right. It's not like you could have done literally anything probably and seen a bit of a bump, but to go the furthest steps away from Party Pringle is probably going to see the biggest upswing, right?
Yeah, I think so. It was quite a funny period. I think that's when I got re-nicknamed Just James, because people thought I'd gone very boring. Because in the space of like a year and a half, I went from like drinking a bottle of vodka in a funnel and like setting myself on fire and like trying to do backflips, to quitting drinking and only eating raw fruits and vegetables and devoting my entire effort to just doing competitions in holes, pretty much. So I got re-nicknamed Just James for a period of time because people was so disappointed by my decisions until it started to pay off.
And after you won World Championships in 2011, there you and Katya have been on a little bit of a journey in terms of moving around what your lifestyle is, like away from kayaking a little bit and more into help, like kind of promoting health and wellness in other people. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you've been up to in what you did in that time? And then I want to circle back to some more recent kayaking, but let's talk about what you were doing to promote this lifestyle that you found and have taken to.
So in terms of the raw diet or lifestyle, whichever you want to call it, really Katya's been the most involved person with, certainly with working with other people and helping sick people with it, because it impacted her a huge amount. And like her mum switched to it and she completely changed her health. And Katya's been the real spearhead of it. And I kind of went we were still living that way, but I actually went off the diet. So I went after 2015 Worlds. I wanted to get a bit of a profession because I realized I was getting older and I probably couldn't rely on kayaking as a means to support myself till I'm an old man. So I wanted to sort of take my filmmaking skills from paddling and sort of take that on the next level. So I made a mistake and got an absolutely shitty job working for someone I don't like, and in the hope that I'd learn more about filmmaking, that kind of thing. And in that situation, it was just, and I wasn't paddling much at all, or if I wasn't really paddling at all in 2016, till 2018 is when I started again. And like when you took away like the dopamine that you get from paddling and being social with people and in that kind of fun environment, it became an awful lot harder to stick to a raw diet. So that's when I sort of went off the diet, and then I sort of went back onto it as soon as I got really motivated for kayaking again. And then it's my journey to sort of telling other people about the raw diet and stuff has really happened in this last couple of years, kind of alongside my return to sort of paddling and competing, is that we've been more involved in sort of the raw vegan community, talking at events, me telling my story about kayaking, about what the switching to this diet's done to assist with my performance over the years, and the fact I can sort of still sort of manage to get by doing it. And then alongside that, helping Katya a bit, and then as I've kind of got into a better place with my filmmaking, so obviously now I do a lot of TV ads, that kind of thing, and then the occasional expedition when I'm very fortunate. So I've sort of kind of matured, I guess, degree, and sort of found our place a little bit more, not just in paddling, but sort of in the wider world and how to support yourself and that kind of way. And sort of given how much health has helped us as to what our lifestyle's given, sharing that alongside the message of sports and a healthy, active lifestyle and incorporating a good diet, whether that be a vegan diet or a raw vegan diet. Obviously, I understand, like, it's impossible that not everyone in the world is going to be able or want to switch to a raw vegan diet. But if everyone includes a greater amount of fresh fruit and vegetables, cooked or not, that will be a great benefit to people's health. So both of us are kind of trying to share a bit of that to as much of the world as we can through whatever means open up to us.
Yeah, I think it's to imagine a future where everybody is on the whole foods plant-based or like raw whole foods plant-based lifestyle. It seems unreasonable, but if more and more people were interested in it, say a few days a week, I think that would have a big impact. Like there's a ton of websites and podcasts out there if people are interested in that space for the impact that would have environmentally, the impact that would have on people's health, the impact that would have economically on our healthcare system by reducing the people who are like crippled by long-term diseases and like diabetes and heart disease, high cholesterol, stroke, all that stuff that can be reduced just by changing what you eat a little bit. On the front end, it would save the economy a lot of money on the back end. With not having to deal with all the like kind of negative health implications of that. And I think if more people were more interested in that some of the time, not even all the time, there would be such a big impact that we will all see a noticeable shift. But I think it's really great that we can point to examples like you and Katya, where you can say, this was the tipping point thing that got me over the edge to being world champion, because that was really the only difference between what you were doing and what Peter was doing at that 2011 time period. Like if that's the tipping point and you saw that small bit of advantage, imagine what an advantage that could be to someone who's just like semi-interested in bettering their performance, right?
Yeah, sure. Like it's, for me, like you do kind of need the extreme examples in the world to show what's possible to a degree in a certain way of things, because I do very much understand that not everyone's going to do what I do eating wise and that kind of thing. And in certain situations and under certain conditions, it's not even the best thing. And I'm not such a stickler for, like, if people eat meat once a week, for example, and for the rest of the time they eat vegetables and eat a vegan diet or whatever, that's better than someone who's probably even just vegetarian, for example. So it's like, I'm not such a what would you call it?
It's not the expression I like
don't
most.
Judge people for their choices, because it's everyone's in their own background, what they've grown up with, what they're doing. So I'm not particularly judgmental in what people are doing, but I for sure want to encourage people to include more vegetables and fruits into their diet in whatever means they might do that. And
the expression I like most is it's not all or nothing, it's all or something.
Yeah.
And so anyway, we just touched on expedition kayaking, and then I wanted to talk to you about the recent expedition you did with Steve. What's his name? Steve Bagshaw. Yeah, like the great adventure guy, like the British BBC, like not Bear Grylls type fellow, but like the more legit, like outdoorsy version, like the better version of Bear Grylls on TV. What did you do? Talk us through that, and then where were you? What was the project? And then if you could talk about how you maintained your eating fruits and vegetables on a big expedition.
Yeah, so I was I met Steve Bagshaw, who's a well-renowned, a very well-respected TV presenter in the UK. He does wildlife TV shows and sometimes wildlife/adventure expedition kind of projects. So he's done a few big projects over the years and a couple of kayaking ones. And I met him shortly after I won Worlds to be a guest showing off freestyle kayaking on his kids' TV show that was at the time called Live and Deadly. And we kind of bumped into each other every now and then when he'd be sort of coming to Nottingham to train with David Bain for his Papua New Guinea expedition. And he knew I'd been doing more and more video work and was doing it at a reasonably decent level. So then I got invited in on the project to run the Chamkachu River, which is the first descent in Bhutan, so in the Himalayas, to come on board as a kayaker / to get some sort of additional footage to go alongside the main camera. So I got invited on this trip, which for a paddler who's primarily a freestyle paddler and for the most part paddling artificial courses is a great privilege, really, to get that opportunity.
Yeah, no doubt.
And so we went, yeah, I was very, very lucky, really, to get invited on the project. And so we went to this amazing river in like the most pristine, stunning country I've ever been to. It's got 75% tree cover. It's the like only carbon positive country in the world, as far as I'm aware, and it's absolutely stunning. And we got to paddle down this river for a week. And so you mentioned about a raw diet, which of course is a challenge in that situation, because raw foods, by the fact that they're not dehydrated, are heavy for a start. And there was quite a bit of vegetables there, but there wasn't a huge selection of fruit. It's very high up in the mountains. And I brought a lot of, the production brought me a lot of knack bars, which is, I don't know if you get them in North America, but it's like a raw date and kind of nut bar thing. So they brought me, I think, hundreds of the things. And my idea was that when I'd get there, I'd be able to see whatever was available and get enough of it to bring with us. And originally we were going to be raft supported with the main camera, and they'd also bring some food along with it. But a few things happened. One was that when we got there just wasn't a great amount of fruit available, and like bananas, which is kind of a staple when you don't have access to a great range of stuff and you don't have a garden and that kind of thing to get what I'd ordinarily be looking for. And wasn't avocados, stuff. Lots of the things that are quite calorie dense that you'd normally want to include just weren't available, and the bananas just weren't ripe at all. So you just couldn't eat enough of them. So I did manage to maintain a raw diet for like the first 2/3 of the expedition, and then the river was not suitable for the raft to come with us, which meant that it was just the kayakers got left to their own and sort of joined in the evening by the team sort of to charge stuff and offload footage, that kind of thing. And then the last bit, I just ended up on like the last like third of the trip. I ended up on whatever kind of like expedition, freeze dried, whatever was left, a lot combined with like some dried fruit, nuts, and whatever I could get hold of really that was suitable for me as best as I could. So I've got a few ideas for the future of if I get involved in any other expedition things of how to sort of be a bit better prepared, bringing some more dehydrated stuff, which ordinarily I wouldn't really eat. But having gone through that, because that was my first expedition experience really, so I didn't fully understand everything involved, especially combining that with my diet. So I've got a few things that I'm going to try out if I get involved in another project, and I'll let you know how that goes.
Well, what were some differences you noticed for that last third of the trip when you had to kind of just eat the dehydrated whatever, like, you don't have as much control of what you're eating? Did you notice any negative impacts, or was it just like, yeah, whatever?
No, like I didn't know. Like to large degree, you also noticing like in normal athletes that like when you're like super physically active, you can to some degree get away with eating whatever for a small window, or for like, especially if you've been eating well for a period beforehand. But because your body's working so hard, it'll just use whatever you put in. Because like, I was getting up at like 7 a.m, it was cold, we was like lugging kayaks around, camera gear around. So, and then obviously the mental, you're running a first descent, and in a lot of cases I'd be going first or on my own down sections to try and get ahead to get a shot. So mentally it's very taxing. So you're burning tons of energy, and in that environment, especially for like three or 4 days or whatever it was, when I was having, and I still was having some raw stuff in there included with it, whatever I could find that was left, is kind of, I was just going a bit half and half to make it last and just to get enough food in, just because we were working so hard. But I can't say I noticed any adverse effects for such a short window.
And then afterwards, it was pretty like you didn't have a negative coming back onto it. You didn't have any like negative.
No, like I think because I've been doing
impacts
for the most part. Yeah, for the most part, because I've been doing it so long, like if I'm doing nothing, if I'm not being physically active, and I just suddenly eat some like cooked food or something, I definitely feel it the next day, because that's kind of like once. Of course, like it's not like we've been fully raw the entire time. Of course, like we'd go to some, especially because for the early years of it, especially, we was motivated purely for performance. So when we'd be in like a social setting, like a family party or a Christmas or something, of course we'd try some of like the cooked things, and you'd notice that you'd feel it the next day, especially if it's something particularly like heavy or processed. But that wasn't for the most part, we'd be fully raw. And because we've been doing it so long now, that especially if you're not eating something that's especially horrific. If you're just having, for example, I don't know, some lentils or something, or some steamed vegetables, or something simple like that. Personally, like especially in that situation, it's not going to, as long as it's not a regular thing that I'm doing all the time, I'm not going to notice. And unless it's something very heavy or toxic, like I say, then you really do feel it.
Interesting stuff. That was kind of a real curiosity I had when I was making notes this morning. I was like, oh, I wonder how you managed the expedition piece and what it was like afterwards. So the last thing I want to talk about then, Pringle, and then is the book that you've recently released. I think you co-wrote it with Katya, or you did most of the writing of it, which is called Juicing for Health and Performance, which is a book about the benefits of drinking vegetable juices. Do you want to give us a lowdown? I'm going to butcher it if I do a lowdown.
Yeah, sure. So like juicing's something we've kind of incorporated more and more this last 5 years as a means of getting extra greens and vegetables in alongside salads and stuff. Because obviously if you eat stuff completely unprocessed, like just as a salad form, you won't consume as much of those nutrients as if you were to juice it. So juicing's kind of become more and more of a thing, especially as we've been more in the UK. We've had a lot more apples and vegetables and that kind of thing, and leaves from the garden available. And so I wrote the book in lockdown. So I was stuck at home without much to do, and I'm staying with my parents. So they're getting on a bit nowadays, and I was conscious that what could I do in this time? One, to keep me busy, and two, to keep them healthy. So I was thinking, I was making juice every day anyway, and it's time to give them it. And then Katya suggested that I should just photograph all the juices, write down all the ingredients I used, and make a book out of it, and sort of put my thoughts down on overall this juicing. So over the course of our lockdown, I think I did it over 30 days, making healthy juices for the whole time, trying to include lots and lots of greens, watery vegetables like cucumber, celery, and then a few fruits which are usually use apples. So stuff that is readily available, not hugely expensive, and a lot of stuff you can just forage in your garden or in the nearby areas, like edible weeds, lots of things like that you can include. And I put that together and sort of finished that, and it sort of kept me sane in lockdown, kept my parents healthy, and I just started sort of seeing what I can do with that nowadays and giving it to people who I think could really need it, and selling it over my Instagram. Yeah, no, I'm still sort of working out what to do with it next. I'm quite proud of it, really. It's my first ever effort, really, at trying to write and put down some of my thoughts and knowledge and collate it together from what I've learned from juicing and from the wider context of diet as well.
Yeah, I read it. I bought it this morning, and I read it in the run up to filming this, and I thought it was really well produced, and the photos are obviously beautiful, and the recipes look fairly simple to follow. But I was really interested in some of the in between parts that you'd written down about as a way to getting more nutrients in, because you obviously wouldn't be able to. You could get more nutrients with the fiber taken out. But one of the things I was interested in is that fiber is obviously really important for your microbiome and really important for your health, your greater health. And I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about how you're using juicing as an addition to eating a lot of fruits and vegetables and not as a replacement. Because I think it's a lot of people look at it, they hear the word juice fast and they're like, oh, you're only drinking juice, that's really bad for you, like blah, blah, blah. And I wanted to just see if we could talk a little bit about the benefits of fiber, because you do need hella fiber in your diet. It's really important. What do you think about that?
Yeah, fiber obviously is hugely important. Use it to basically help with your excretory functions and get rid of a lot of dead cells and toxins in your body. If you're not getting fiber as part of your diet, you're going to struggle to do those functions as efficiently or as well as when you have it included. So for the most part, when I'm talking about juicing in the book and in general, I'm meaning it as an addition to having a fiber-rich whole food diet of including lots of fresh salads, fresh fruits in their whole form, not in a smoothie form all the time. So it's as a boost to get those extra nutrients in, whether that be to help if you're struggling with health problems or just want to boost your immune system, or whether you're a very active athlete. So if you're an athlete who's doing an awful lot and physically, you'll use a lot more minerals and nutrients than someone who's sat in an office all day, so your requirements will be different. And like a juice fast in its own right can be a useful thing to do for a short period of time to, for example, help you overcome a health issue perhaps, or to sort of reset yourself to a degree. But as an overall thing, you can't live off juices all the time. That's not sustainable. That's not, one, you won't get enough calories because you're not going to be able to do it, and two, it's unsustainable. But I'm talking primarily as using a juice as a supplement, I suppose, to sort of give yourself a boost. And you were using a lot of these antioxidants to help get rid of stuff that we're accumulating in a world that's greater and greater in pollution, and help us deal with that sort of situation and fortify our health, really.
Yeah, I think it was a really interesting piece because I've been on the kind of whole foods plant-based lifestyle for I guess about 18 months now, but I cook all my food and I eat a variety of fruits and vegetables and stuff, and I mainly switched like kind of a similar situation to you and Katia, where I was like, okay, I'm getting older, I'm looking for every edge I can get to keep up with the kids because they're coming at you all the time, and they're younger and faster, and they're running bigger waterfalls and throw more tricks, and you got to keep up. So I've been looking for those competitive edges as wherever I can find them, really, and I really enjoy Whole Foods plant-based is like the it was like an experiment I tried that I've stuck with, and I've seen a big difference in myself in terms of like how I feel, energy levels and stuff. But the additional idea that you kind of laid out in your book that I thought was really interesting was just getting all these additional, like another boost of like minerals and vitamins and antioxidants that I might be missing out on as a supplementary aid, if you like. And I thought that was really interesting, and another way to look at juices, because I'd previously looked at juices just like no fiber, no point, I don't want to do that. Having read your book, now I'm more interested in saying like, oh, maybe I'll just experiment with this a little bit and see what the outcome of it is.
Yeah, the other thing to add probably is where a lot of people go wrong with juices is they make them very, very sweet. So they'll put an awful lot of sweet fruit in there. And when you haven't got the fiber there, it'll kind of work on you much the same way as like a Coca-Cola would, or like a super sweet drink, that you'll get a huge spike in your blood sugar, which will, one, trigger your appetite the next day because your insulin has to rise to deal with it. So I keep my juices so it's just sweet enough to make it tasty. So like all the juices are tasty, but they're not like insanely sweet or anything. For the most part, I'm using it just to get in the extra nutrients and stuff that will help keep you healthy. And also partly as a means to make it palatable for my parents as well. So juicing something that, as long as you're not making them in a way that using ingredients that makes them taste horrible or not balancing the taste right with them, it's something that everyone can incorporate whatever the rest of their diet is. So obviously there's an optimum of what you could be. You could be on a whole food plant-based diet, juicing, eating tons of salads, all these things, and that would be great. But for a lot of people, they'll just be having their usual junk food. But if they can include some amount of those nutrients in that they're probably not getting from the rest of their diet, that could make a huge difference for them, probably more of a difference than for someone who's already on a pretty healthy diet. But for me, it's just trying to find ways to help my parents, find something that I enjoy doing. And also we have an abundance of apples here every winter, and greens, and it's ways to use all those produce well as well.
Yeah, for sure. I really enjoyed it, and I thoroughly recommend people go check it out. Where can people check it out if they're interested in reading it on the internet?
Probably the easiest way is to go to my Instagram, and just the links in the bio. My Instagram is just my name, James Bebbington. So it's James followed by Bebbington, and the links in the bio. Or you can also get to it through mine and Catch's website, which we've just started, which is masteringhumanbehavior.com. That also has a link to it.
Right on. I think I've kind of chatted about everything I wanted to chat about, Pringle. I'm really hyped that you had time to rehash a lot of the great conversation we had in the failed version of this podcast, and I thank you deeply for your patience. But I also think people are going to. I hope people are more interested in taking a harder look about what they're eating and making some changes to their to their health that could improve their kayaking. Because really, that's kind of the underlying theme of this podcast is always like, I'm just looking for ways to improve my kayaking. And I think secretly people just listen along because they're just trying to improve as well. So I'm certainly enjoyed reading your book this morning, and I am certainly going to try juicing some things and adding that in as a little sideline thing and see how it goes and maybe record the results. Is there anything you want to finish off with or want to talk about before we call it?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Seth, and I hope I remembered to talk about enough about kayaking on the second version. But yeah, like I say, diet has been a huge part of what's helped me in kayaking, and it's hard for me to talk about one without the other. Yeah, well, just thanks for having me. If anyone has any questions, feel free to send me a message. Yeah, and I look forward to hearing how you get on, Seth.
I'll keep you posted. All right, this has been Seth Ashworth and James Pringle Bebbington. Questions you never thought to ask. The Whitewater Kayaking Podcast. Peace.